My name is Ella Dawson, and I never imagined the moment my family would break would come because of a question so simple, so innocent. My daughter, Maya, had always been the quiet one in the family, often hiding her emotions behind her smile. But that afternoon, she dared to ask what had been on her mind for years. "Why do you hate Dad because of his face?" she asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the question. We were sitting in the living room, the air thick with unspoken tension, when the words slipped out as if they had been waiting to be said. My mother, who had spent the last decade simmering with resentment toward my ex-husband, looked at Maya like she had just struck her. Her face twisted with anger, the kind of fury I had only seen in her when she relived old hurts. Without warning, my mother violently pushed Maya back into the couch, her hands trembling from rage. "Don't you dare talk about him," she shouted. "You have no idea what he did to me." Maya stared at her, eyes wide with confusion, trying to understand the depth of a hatred she had never known. But before I could say anything, my father, who had been silently watching from the corner, stood up. After 10 years of holding his tongue, his voice finally cracked the silence. "He never should have hurt you, Nancy," he said, his tone heavy with regret. But pushing Maya like that was unforgivable. The words hung in the air like an explosion, tearing open wounds I had thought were long healed. I didn't know how to react. What happened next completely shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. The room was still as my father's words echoed in my ears. I looked from my father to my mother, who now seemed to shrink in her chair, her face reddened with shame. This wasn't the man who had been silent for 10 years. This wasn't the man who had stood by while my mother's bitterness poisoned everything. This was a different side of him, a side I had never seen. Maya, still recovering from the shock of being shoved, sat up slowly, her small frame trembling. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply stared at my mother, as if trying to understand the rift that had now been exposed in our family. I wanted to comfort her, to shield her from this mess of hurt and regret, but I couldn't. My father's words had changed the dynamic, and now my mother was on the defensive. "You've never said a word in all these years," my mother whispered, her voice shaking. "You've let me carry the burden of everything. Now you stand up for her." My father didn't answer immediately. His face, usually soft and kind, was now hard, like a wall had been built around him. I've been silent because I didn't know what to say. But Maya, she's right to ask. She deserves to know the truth. Truth. That word cut through me like a knife. I had spent so long protecting my daughter from the mess of my failed marriage, from the fractured relationship between my parents, that I never thought about what they truly felt about each other. Maya's question had unlocked a floodgate of buried emotions, and the dam was breaking faster than any of us could handle. My heart pounded as I looked from my daughter, who was still trying to make sense of this, to my mother, who now seemed like a stranger. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice small. My mother turned to me, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. Fear. "Your father. He always knew. He just let it happen," she said, her voice trailing off. I felt the room closing in on me. I had never understood the depth of my mother's pain until now. But Maya's question had done more than just expose my mother's buried anger. It had pulled back the curtain on a family secret I wasn't ready to face. And what happened next would leave us all broken in ways we could never repair. The family we once were was gone. The silence that followed felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. Maya's face was pale, her lips trembling, but she stayed silent. Her question had struck deep, exposing things that had remained hidden for years. My mother's eyes shifted between me and my father, guilt and rage warring within her. She was trying to hold on to her composure, but it was clear that the truth was unraveling her. The truth that had been buried for so long. "Why didn't you ever say anything, Dad?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't keep the confusion from my words. My father had always been the quiet one, but never the one to side with my mother in her bitterness. He had always been so passive about everything that I couldn't understand what had made him speak up now. He shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed with regret. I should have said something. But every time I tried, it felt like there was too much pain. I thought if I stayed quiet, it wouldn't make things worse. Maya's small voice broke through the tension. But why didn't you protect Mom? Why didn't you protect us? Her innocence hung in the air, making every adult in the room feel even more guilty. It was a question I had wondered about myself, but never had the courage to ask. Now, hearing it from Maya made it too real. My mother's hands clenched into fists on the table. You don't understand. You have no idea what I went through with him, she snapped at Maya, her voice rising. You think you're the only one who's been hurt? Maya flinched, and my heart ached. I was already exhausted from the emotional whiplash, and I knew Maya must have felt like she was caught in a whirlwind. Stop, I finally shouted. The intensity of the moment broke me, and I stood, shaking with the force of my own anger. Stop using her as an excuse to keep this cycle going. My mother's face paled, and she shrank back slightly, but the words had already left my mouth. My father stood, the first time he'd moved in what felt like forever, his hand on my shoulder. Ella, I've failed you both, he murmured. But I'm here now. I can't fix the past, but I can start by making sure this never happens again. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I wasn't ready to forgive him, but I couldn't keep pretending that my family was whole either. What had happened in that room had torn everything I knew apart, and from this point on, there was no going back. The days after the confrontation passed in a blur. The house felt empty, even though everyone was still there. Maya retreated into herself, spending more time in her room than at the dinner table. My mother became quieter, withdrawn, as though the emotional dam had burst and she was struggling to keep from drowning in the aftermath. My father, though remorseful, seemed lost in the role of a man trying to catch up on a decade of silence. But it wasn't just the silence that bothered me. It was the weight of everything that had been said. The truths that were now out in the open. My mother's hatred for my ex-husband had been a constant presence in my life, and it had built walls between us. But hearing it from her, hearing her violent reaction when Maya had asked the question, shattered something deep inside me. It made me question everything about how I had been raised, how I had been taught to handle pain, and how I had been conditioned to stay silent when things got hard. One evening, Maya came to me while I was sitting alone in the living room. She stood in the doorway, her expression hesitant but determined. I didn't ask her to come in, but she did anyway. She sat next to me, her hands twisted in her lap. Mom, she started, her voice soft but clear. I don't understand. Why was it so bad for Grandma to push me like that? I turned to her, my heart breaking all over again. I hadn't been able to explain it to her before. How do you explain a lifetime of toxic behavior to a 14-year-old? Maya, I said quietly, some people hold on to their pain for so long that they forget how to let it go. They don't know how to heal, and it poisons everything around them. She nodded slowly, processing my words. And Grandma, she's hurting, isn't she? Maya asked. Yes, I said, my voice thick. But that doesn't mean she can hurt others because of it. You were never supposed to carry her pain. She sat with that for a moment, then looked at me, her eyes clear with understanding. I don't think I can ever forgive Grandma for what she did, she said, her voice steady but sad. I exhaled, brushing my hand through my hair. I know, baby, and you don't have to right now. It's okay to take your time. But don't let her actions make you carry the anger she feels. It's not your burden. We sat in silence for a while. It felt heavy, but also like a new kind of understanding had formed between us. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward healing. But I knew there was still so much more to work through. My mother, my father, and even Maya, they all had their own paths to walk now. And while it was going to be a long, messy journey, I finally realized something. I couldn't fix this. But I could protect my daughter from it. And that had to be enough. The next morning, I packed a bag for Maya. I didn't tell anyone where we were going. We didn't need their approval, not anymore. It was time to leave. Time to take the first real step toward our own peace. And as I drove away from the house, my parents' house, I realized that we were already moving forward, even if they weren't ready to join us yet. The road stretched before us, empty and quiet, as Maya stared out the window, lost in thought. We hadn't spoken much since I started driving, and I wasn't sure if she wanted to talk or if she needed the space. Sometimes silence was more comforting than words, especially when everything felt so raw. As we drove, I couldn't help but think about how much my life had changed in the past few days. The confrontation with my parents had left me shaken, but it had also given me clarity. For years, I had been caught between the anger and resentment of my family, trying to keep everything intact, but I could no longer live in that constant tension. Not for my sake, and especially not for Maya's. We ended up at a small lakeside cabin I'd rented for a few days. It was simple, tucked away in the woods, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. There were no distractions, no family drama, no obligations. Just the two of us. I unpacked our things and set up the little living space with a sense of purpose. Maya had always been drawn to nature, and I knew this would give her a chance to breathe, to reflect. She wasn't the type to open up easily, but sometimes just being in a new environment could make all the difference. Later that evening, after we'd settled in, we sat on the porch, watching the sunset reflect off the water. Maya shifted uncomfortably before finally speaking. "Do you think Grandma will ever change?" she asked, her voice small. I exhaled slowly, choosing my words carefully. "I don't know, sweetie. People don't change easily, and sometimes they don't want to. But that doesn't mean we have to keep carrying their burdens. You have your own life to live, your own happiness to find." She nodded, her eyes not quite meeting mine. "I just want things to be normal again." I reached over and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Normal doesn't always mean going back to what it was. Sometimes it's about moving forward, even if it's just one small step at a time. Maya was quiet for a moment, then finally looked at me, her eyes searching. "Mom, do you think we can be happy again? Without them?" I smiled softly, a tear slipping down my cheek as I wiped it away. "I don't know what the future holds, Maya, but I know that we'll find our own happiness. Together." And for the first time in days, I felt a sense of peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because I was finally choosing to move forward. For the first time in my life, I was putting myself and my daughter first, and that made all the difference. That night, as we sat by the fire, the warmth from the flames and the quiet of the forest filled the space between us. We didn't need to talk anymore. We were finally learning how to heal, and that was enough for now. The next few days in the cabin passed slowly, but in a way that felt healing. There was no rushing, no noise, just the calm rhythm of the lake lapping against the shore and the birds singing at dawn. Maya and I spent our mornings hiking through the woods, our afternoons reading and painting on the porch, and our evenings talking or sitting in peaceful silence, letting the quiet settle around us. But even in this serenity, the thoughts I'd been avoiding crept back in. The brokenness in my family wasn't just an incident. It was a pattern, a cycle of pain and resentment that had spanned decades. I had hoped for so long that things would fix themselves, but they didn't. The fractures had only deepened, and now Maya had witnessed the worst of it. One morning, as we sat on the dock, Maya broke the silence. "I don't think Grandma meant to hurt me," she said quietly, her fingers trailing across the water. "I think she was just scared." I looked at her, surprised. "Scared of what?" "Scared of losing control," she said, almost to herself. She wanted everything to stay the same, and I don't think she knew how to let go. I didn't know how to respond to that. My daughter had always been perceptive, but her insight into my mother's emotions was unexpected. She was still trying to make sense of things, of people she loved, even if they hurt her. I squeezed her hand gently. "Maybe you're right. Maybe she was scared. But that doesn't make it okay, does it?" Maya shook her head. "No. But maybe we have to understand it before we can forgive it." Her words echoed in my mind, much heavier than I anticipated. Maybe we have to understand it before we can forgive it. My mother's anger, her bitterness, her manipulation, it had always been difficult for me to process. But what Maya said made me realize something. Maybe I'd spent too long fighting against her pain, trying to protect myself from it. But perhaps there was a way to look at it differently, not as a justification, but as a starting point for healing. As the days passed, Maya and I continued to find our own rhythm. The cabin became our sanctuary, a place where we could grow and process everything without the weight of family expectations looming over us. Maya's smile was slowly returning, brighter than before, and I found myself starting to breathe easier, no longer tethered by the suffocating grip of the past. And yet, the reality still lingered. I knew I would have to face my parents again soon. The silence between us couldn't last forever. But now, I wasn't afraid of what would happen when we spoke. I wasn't afraid of their judgments or their anger. I was ready to set boundaries and reclaim my voice, for Maya and for me. And as the sun began to set that evening, casting its golden light across the lake, I felt something I hadn't in years, a quiet sense of hope. We were still here. We were still moving forward. And no matter what came next, that was enough. The days in the cabin came to an end far too soon, but Maya and I were ready to return home. Our time away had given us both the space to think, to breathe, and to process what had happened with my family. We didn't have all the answers yet, but we had peace. And sometimes that was enough. On the drive back, I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind wandered. I wasn't sure what kind of welcome we'd get from my parents. I wasn't sure if I was even ready to face them. The anger and hurt from everything that had transpired still simmered beneath the surface, but I knew it was time to return, to put the past behind us and move forward. When we pulled into the driveway, I took a deep breath before stepping out of the car. Maya followed me, her expression quiet but resolute. We didn't speak as we made our way inside. The house felt different, quieter, less filled with tension than it had been before. But I knew that didn't mean the storm had passed. The hard conversations were still ahead. I walked into the living room to find my mother sitting there, waiting. Her face was pale, eyes tired. She looked older somehow, as though the weight of the past few days had worn her down in ways I hadn't expected. She looked up when I entered and opened her mouth to say something, but no words came. Maya stood behind me, looking at her grandmother with the same mixture of hurt and confusion I felt. I placed my hand on her shoulder, a silent signal to stand strong. Finally, my mother spoke. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to push you away, Ella. I didn't mean to hurt you or Maya. But I've been angry for so long. I didn't know how to stop." The apology came like a slow drip, hesitant and fragile. I could feel the years of pain she'd been carrying in her words, but they weren't enough to erase the past. Not yet. But maybe it was a start. I glanced at Maya, who nodded faintly, though I could see the walls still up around her. The damage wasn't fixed with a simple apology, but it was a beginning. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't thought possible, a flicker of hope. "I understand," I said, my voice steady. "But understanding doesn't mean things are okay. It means we can start to work on them." My mother nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't reach for her this time. She had to make the next move, and I knew it would take time. But for now, that was enough. The door to healing had been opened, and though it might take years to fully walk through, Maya and I would take it step by step, together. A few weeks later, things had started to shift. The conversations were still difficult, and there were moments where the silence between us felt too thick to cut through. But Maya and I had learned something powerful during our time away. We didn't need to wait for others to heal us. We had the power to heal ourselves. I kept my boundaries firm but open. My mother began to make an effort, calling me more often, checking in on Maya. The conversations were still awkward, but at least we were talking. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Maya turned to me with a small smile. "Do you think things will ever be normal again?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. "Maybe not the way they were before," I said. "But maybe that's okay. Sometimes, things need to change for us to move forward." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the same quiet understanding that I had come to terms with in those quiet days at the cabin. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a shift, not just in my family, but in myself. I didn't need to fix everything, didn't need to make it all right. I just needed to keep moving forward, step by step, alongside the people who were willing to join me. Maya and I had already found our way. We just had to keep walking it. And as I held her hand, feeling the warmth of her presence beside me, I realized that this was enough. We were enough.